Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. And it's the aftermath of the Zelensky getting crushed. The Democrats definitely want war, and so do the European Union. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Let's get into the content. Salute.
In this video today, I'm going to show you why the Democrats have made another colossal mistake, as they are now calling Trump and Vance a bully for that heated exchange between them and Zelensky yesterday. And I'm going to debunk that claim in this video. But where I want to start first is Zelensky going out to Fox News and refusing to apologize.
So I'm not hearing from you, Mr. President, a thought that you owe the president an apology.
No, I respect president and I respect American people. And if, I don't know, if I think that we have to be very open and very honest. And I'm not sure that we did something bad. I think maybe sometimes some things we have to discuss out of media, with all respect to democracy and to a free media. But there are things that where we have to understand the position of Ukraine and Ukrainians.
Now, it has become abundantly clear since this went down that there is a huge political divide within America about what happened, okay? One side is saying Zelensky should not apologize. In fact, Trump and Vance should apologize, and Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz needs to resign.
Mark, are you saying Marco Rubio should resign?
And Mike Waltz, this is really the time to do it. If they don't get out now, I think their reputations will suffer for a long, long time. And that would be sad, because their record in believing in a strong American national security policy has been very good up until now.
The people on the right, conservatives, definitely people who voted for Trump, believe Zelensky owes the apology, especially if we've already spent $150 billion of taxpayer money, weapons and ammunition, and we are the ones that have actually kept them in the war. Without us, the war would have been over already.
But what specifically do you want to see President Zelensky apologize for?
Well, apologize for turning this thing into the fiasco for him that it became. There was no need for him to go in there and become antagonistic. Look, this thing went off the rails. You were there, I believe. It went off the rails when he said, let me ask you a question to the vice president. What kind of diplomacy are you talking about?
So if the goal is to end this war and sign this agreement, don't do anything that puts that in jeopardy, like disagreeing with the president and the vice president in front of American media. Now, towards the end of this interview, he does what we all wanted him to do, which is to apologize.
Last thing, Mr. President. Yeah. Do you think your relationship with Donald Trump, President Trump, after today, can be salvaged?
Can be? Yes, of course, because it's relations more than two presidents. It's the historical relations, strong relations between our people. And that's why I always began with to thank your people, from our people. And this is the most important. And of course, thankful to President and of course to Congress, but first of all to your people. Your people helped to save our people. People, the first. Human rights, the first. This is very, very important. And we are thankful and sorry for this. I mean, we wanted very much to have only strong relations, and I very count that we will have it.
Now, after the interview, he put this up on social media. We're very grateful to the United States for all the support. I'm thankful to President Trump, Congress for their bipartisan support, and American people. Ukrainians have always appreciated the support, especially during these 3 years of full-scale invasion. My only response to it, why didn't you just say that in front of the cameras? Right? I mean, this is the mistake that he made, is he did not have to react to the vice president. He didn't have to say anything. If you looked at Macron or even the UK prime minister, they never took the bait. There's clear disagreements between America and Europe. There's clear disagreements between Macron and Trump, but you did not see the same heated exchange. Why? because they're a little bit more savvy in front of the cameras in comparison to Zelensky. So common sense would say Zelensky is clearly tired of this war. Secondly, there's a language barrier. And thirdly, he misread the room. That's not what Democrats believe. They believe it was an ambush.
It wasn't just a mistake. It was an ambush. I mean, this was a plan. This was a politically calculated ambush from all sides, right? No one would feel comfortable walking into an environment like that from any country, and no one should be treated that way. From the reporter to the greeting to the mocking of his clothes, it was beneath America and beneath the White House to treat a guest in our country and a leader who is actively engaged in combat, who is right now losing his fellow service members, he's losing his women and children, his cities are being bombed. And we're talking about his clothes, and we're talking to him that way. It was victim shaming, which is what Trump has been doing to Zelensky in Ukraine since before he got elected. It's unacceptable, it's inappropriate, and it's also undermining not just Ukraine, but our own national security. We are now aligned with the bad guys. Russia is the bad guy, Ukraine is the good guy. And when we continue to attack Ukraine and defend Russia, that puts us in line with the bad guys, which is not where America wants to be.
Now, this is why I stated it's a colossal mistake from the people on the left, specifically Democrats, okay? If they're going to run with this type of rhetoric, they have to understand what it sounds like. It sounds like they hate President Trump more than they love the United States of America. That's what I find so interesting about the reactions here. They believe it was an ambush. They believe it was premeditated. Listen, at the end of the day, Zelensky got out of control emotionally and everything fell apart. That's the bottom line to it. And so here's what Scott Jennings had to say in response to people who believe that this was an ambush and premeditated.
I think it was premeditated.
I don't know.
I think Zelensky misplayed it in the room, and you can, and we could disagree about JD Vance's position on it or agree on it. But either way, Zelensky certainly had been briefed on what the right way to handle this was. And all he had to do was walk in there and say, thank you. I'm really grateful to be here. We want to be partners with the United States. We're grateful for your leadership. Where's the papers? And what are we having for lunch? That's all he had to do. And look, the posturing doesn't have to occur now. If he is serious about wanting peace and ending this war, you don't have to keep posturing as a tough guy. Everybody knows you're tough, all right? The Ukrainians are tough. They're brave. They're fighting a much larger country. Everybody knows. The question for Zelensky is, can you take off the military uniform and put on the uniform of diplomacy? He failed the test today.
And that's why it's disturbing, the reaction from Democrats, because they know that too, but they don't want to admit it. This is why I put this post up on social media, where I said, if you believe bad-mouthing Putin during negotiations will get him to the table and ultimately end this war, then I have a front beach property in Kentucky to sell you. Democrats need to knock it off. Everybody knows he is a dictator and doesn't care for human life. We are talking about thousands of lives lost and tax money down the drain. Why do Democrats continue to push this emotional talking point knowing it won't work? They want President Trump to badmouth Putin every second. But let's remember, Putin never took Joe Biden's calls whatsoever. No progress was made under that administration. Now, all of a sudden, Putin wants to come to the table, have a conversation. They already had a meeting in Saudi Arabia. Why is that? Because they dialed back their rhetoric, because we know you don't want to antagonize the guy who's holding a gun to the hostage's head. It's common sense. However, the former ambassador to the UN who served under the Obama administration, she has a different perspective. Let's hear it.
Well, Nicole, obviously it's a very sad day and an embarrassment for the United States on the world stage. But let's step back and analyze what's happened here. I think there's no question that this was a setup. You heard Donald Trump say at the end of that clip you played, this is great television. This was a setup.
For the whole world.
Volodymyr Zelensky was compelled to agree to a horrible deal that would have sent Ukraine's minerals to the United States.
Now, this is disgusting. Now, U.S. gangsterism is horrible. But when Obama was taking resources and killing people and putting black people in cages and working with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, that was democracy and freedom. Taking it all over the world. This is treason too. This is a horrible deal. What?
United States,
so you don't like
without
taking
any concrete security guarantees.
Now, I find it fascinating that Susan Rice is calling this deal horrible without actually acknowledging the common sense that supports it. Meaning what? By us being economically tied to Ukraine, by default, there is a security guarantee. Why would we allow Russia to dominate Ukraine when we're trying to obviously financially benefit from the rare earth minerals inside their territory? These people have degrees, years of political experience. It's like they forget all that when the cameras come on. Now, there's so much more to get to in this video and more at play that's not really being discussed. And we're going to show you that later in this video. But just hear what she has to say about the vice president.
And I think, as he said at the end, because he can't, help himself, this was a setup for the cameras. It was a play to his base, but above all, it was a play to Vladimir Putin, to show fealty to Vladimir Putin, and to try to humiliate Zelensky. But Zelensky didn't play along with the script, because Zelensky's got dignity and guts, and Zelensky has people that he democratically represents.
That's a lot.
So needless to say, again, this represents a rhetoric from the Democratic Party that they hate President Trump more than they love America.
Come see us on tour. We're going to be in Baltimore, Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, New York, Cohoes, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. Trump repeatedly confirmed that he's going to continue to send arms to Ukraine, though. Yeah, we're going to be continuing. We will have arms to Ukraine. But then Zelensky couldn't resist instigating a totally unnecessary debate with J.D. Vance. What a bizarre performance. What do you think, really? Do you think Zelensky thought he was going to come in and bully Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and the American people?
On camera?
Well, on camera? What? Like, I understood that he was the one who insisted on doing it in front of camera. I can't validate that, but what do both of you think about that?
It's an excellent question. I think that he did think that he could bully Donald Trump, or at least embarrass Donald Trump on camera. I mean, he's been trying to get this guarantee of some kind from the Americans. He's very, very angry that he hasn't got it, that Donald Trump hasn't given him the guarantee, the security guarantee that he's been looking for. I don't even really understand, by the way, what the security guarantee he is talking about even is now, because the Americans have said no NATO. But, Zelensky's never someone to take no for an answer. So I think he came along. Probably he's had difficult words with Biden before. Apparently he has. But he seems to have thought that if he could do it this time on camera, well, that would embarrass the Americans and it might get him what he wanted. Who knows? It's difficult to read Zelensky's mind, but that he was already very angry before he came to Washington, that he was fuming, that we could see. I mean, we could see that it would happen, something like this would happen. In fact, we said on one of our programs today that there was a real possibility that there could be some kind of a smash when Zelensky came to Washington. He's very, very angry that he offered all those mineral rights to the Americans. He started doing this back in the summer. He thought that it was some kind of bribe that would get the Americans to continue to support him and to support Ukraine. He was very unhappy that he was presented with a deal which basically gave those mineral rights to the Americans, and he didn't get the security guarantee that he was looking for. And at some point, he just went over the edge. And if you follow Zelensky, it really isn't that surprising. That is who he is. I mean, people have got, used to thinking of Zelensky as this accomplished world leader. He's never been that. The person you saw today is the real Zelensky. He's always been this way. There's a great article, by the way, in the British magazine, The Spectator, which just, from somebody who knows him, who makes exactly that point. And it was written again several days ago.
So, Alex, why doesn't Zelensky just take the deal, retire to his vineyard in Italy, and make wine? I'm sure he's got houses now. I'm sure that, I'm sure he's got at least $1 billion stash somewhere through a third or fourth party and shell companies and what have you. I mean, why? I mean, Colonel McGregor was on the show and he said he doesn't think that they're going to let Zelensky live like that they're going to come and axe him. But why doesn't he just take the deal and get out of Dodge?
Well, there were reports that claim that he wanted to go to Paris, or he has some sort of deal set up to go to Paris. The New York Post reported on that about a week ago. So maybe he doesn't go to Italy. Maybe he goes to Paris. I don't know. But I think he's got a lot of difficulties trying to exit this entire mess. I think he's got difficulties coming from the United States, perhaps from various intel agencies. I'm sure he knows a lot of stuff that they don't want coming out. He's got a lot of problems in Ukraine. He's got the Banderites. He's got the Nazis in the West. All of these people who want him to continue the war, and they're going to be very upset if this thing comes to a conclusion. So I mean, he probably had an opportunity last March. If he had elections, he could have had those elections. His wife was actually nudging him to have the elections. He canceled those elections. We all know, everyone knows now, because Trump talks about it all the time, that he canceled those elections. And that probably was the last opportunity that he had to exit the scene. He could have had those elections. He would have lost, and he could have said, okay, I'll see you guys later. But he decided to stay on. I think he decided to stay on because he understands that if he goes to the West, he's going to have problems because of everything he knows and then the big mess up that he's made. And if he stays in Ukraine, well, then he's got a whole set of other problems. The only place he could probably go to be safe would be to call Putin, I guess. I mean, call Putin and just tell Putin, look, can you take care of me? I don't know.
Anyway, any last words about this scene today, gentlemen?
Well, it is the end of Zelensky, and I have to say, I think it's the beginning of the end of the whole story. I can't imagine that the US is going to continue to support Ukraine at the same level that it's been. Anything like that, I think that the Americans will gradually walk away. The Europeans may try to keep this going, but even they will probably realize at some point that they just can't. So perhaps actually, as a result of all of this, we might be a step closer to peace because either Zelensky will go and somebody will take over in Kiev who's more realistic than he is and understands that the Americans are not going to go on bankrolling this indefinitely and will start to negotiate seriously to achieve peace, or something else will happen which will at least bring the war to an end. But I think that we are now really definitely in the end game, the end stage from this point.
I mean, Zelensky looks so sad. I expect to see him on Cameo soon, asking you to give him $50 to wish your wife happy birthday. Come see us.
Western world is on fire today, continuing in the aftermath of the even bigger fire that was launched on the floor of the Oval Office in the White House yesterday afternoon between Volodymyr Zelensky, first the Vice President J.D. Vance, and then President Trump. Wow, everybody is still trying to figure out what happened. And what we've seen is really it's kind of cleaved into two different camps. And if you heading into this already liked Volodymyr Zelensky, he comes out and looks like the hero. He's a strong man. He stood up to the bully, all that kind of stuff. If you already like President Trump, then you come out thinking, oh, he was right. Zelensky was wrong. He was ungrateful. He's not focused or whatever. And that's about the extent of it. I've seen this all over the place on social media, on Telegram channels, on Twitter, just you name it, on all the major networks. Everybody is talking about this. But I think that they're missing the real story about what actually happened. You have one other, I guess, line of thinking that many people, especially those who don't like President Trump, are saying actually that Trump baited him into this, Zelensky, that Trump and Vance wanted this explosion because it's going to help them do whatever they want to do. In fact, here is former I believe it was National Security Advisor under the Obama administration, Susan Rice.
I think there's no question that this was a setup. It was a play to his base, but above all, it was a play to Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, that's not the case. That is absolutely not the case. And I'm about to show you a number of things that will prove that there is no way this was set up. This actually took President Trump by surprise. It took Vance by surprise. It took all of his senior leaders by surprise, and it also took a lot of the Ukrainian leaders by surprise as well. It took some of Zelensky's allies on the Trump side by surprise, and as you're going to see. And we're going to show you a lot of that. I'm going to prove to you that not only was this not set up by the U.S. side, they tried to give Zelensky many off-ramps and abilities to stop this, but he didn't take any of them. Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? And then the real question is going to be, now what? Where does this go now? What can we expect to happen after this? Because I promise you, this is not just going to be a dust up. It's not just going to be an embarrassing moment. This is going to have some consequences, I feel. And it could go good for the Ukrainian people, or it could go bad. There's depending on what actions various players have after that. We'll get to that in a minute. But first of all, I want to show you what happened. Now, you've seen the clip, I'm sure, 100 times on all the networks, social media, whatever, about the explosion, about the exchange back and forth. But I'm going to show you what happened before that happened, and you can see the slow burn and how this starts to happen. I'm going to show you a clip, and we're going to start and stop it a few times here. And I'm going to especially want you to watch for body language, both for the President Trump, for Zelensky, and for J.D. Vance. And you're going to see how things start to escalate. Now, what's not on this clip right here is something happened earlier on. You may recall when we did our show on this in the immediate aftermath yesterday, Gary showed this scene of Zelensky arriving at the White House. Trump was out there to meet him, and he made some comment on his clothes. And he said, "Oh, you're dressed up," or something like that, because he was wearing that fatigue suit, that black thing. In the earlier part of this meeting here, one of the reporters actually kind of dressed down Zelensky. I thought it was really disrespectful of this reporter, because he just badgered him on, "Where's your suit? How come you're not wearing a suit?" and all this kind of stuff. And I thought that was really odd and just inappropriate. But so that kind of had Zelensky on edge a little bit at the beginning. Then things started. The most of it was fine, but you could tell that Zelensky wasn't liking what Trump was saying, because Trump is saying he wants to have a negotiated settlement. He wants to have this end. He wanted to do this minerals deal. That was the ostensible reason for all of this meeting here. But he said, no, we want to end the war. We're actually using the minerals deal to help find an end to the war, which is not really what Zelensky was looking for. In this clip we're going to start with right here, you had a reporter, I believe he was from Poland, saying that he had been talking with some of his colleagues, and they were concerned that Trump was being too friendly towards Vladimir Putin. Now, as you watch this, I want you to pay attention to Zelensky's facial expressions when Trump talks about how much Zelensky hates Putin. Watch this.
And now I'm talking with my friends in Poland, and they are worried that you align yourself too much with Putin. What's your message for them?
Well, if I didn't align myself with both of them, you'd never have a deal. You want me to say really terrible things about Putin and then say, "Hi, Vladimir, how are we doing on the deal?" That doesn't work that way. I'm not aligned with Putin. I'm not aligned with anybody. I'm aligned with the United States of America and for the good of the world. I'm aligned with the world. and I want to get this thing over with. You see the hatred he's got for Putin. It's very tough for me to make a deal with that kind of hate. He's got tremendous hatred. And I understand that, but I can tell you the other side isn't exactly in love with, him either. So it's not a question of alignment. I'm aligned with the world. I want to get the thing set. I'm aligned with Europe. I want to see if we can get this thing done. You want me to be tough? I could be tougher than any human being you've ever seen. I'd be so tough, but you're never going to get a deal that way. So that's the way it goes.
Okay, stop.
One more question.
Okay. So you see right there that Trump is saying, I'm on my side. I'm not on the Ukraine side. I'm not on the Russian side. I'm kind of on European side, only because he's trying to scoot them into his corner, not because he's going in their direction. But he laid out very unequivocally what his thoughts are. He's wanting the war to come to an end, and he wanted to do this minerals deal because what he said elsewhere in the conversation was, he said, that's a security guarantee of a sort, because I've already talked to Putin and he knows that this is coming. So if I put American businesses in that part of or anywhere in Ukraine to do this, and then they come under fire from the Russian side, then I have to respond. Putin knows that. He's not going to do it. So this will give you some security guarantees. Obviously, we're not talking like an Article 5 deal. We're not saying it would be an automatic military. So from Zelensky's perspective, it's not that great. But that's kind of what he wanted to convey in here. But you see that he was talking about, look, I'm not going to demonize Putin, because how can I demonize him in public and then go and say stuff behind the scenes for him? So that makes sense. But then he added that, Putin didn't like Zelensky. And he said, obviously, Zelensky hates Putin. So that's implying that's kind of a roadblock here that we're trying to work around, but I'm going to do it. And he said, I'm going to be for the United States, what's good for us. So Zelensky is now coming to realize, okay, this is not good for me from his perspective, from Zelensky. He's going down a path that I'm not really liking here, because he's not going to give me the security guarantees. You've seen, and we're going to show you here in a minute, even subsequent to this, where Zelensky's still looking for security guarantees. He's still looking for NATO and several other kind of things, none of which is on the table right there in front of him. So he's starting to, I don't know if he's going to get agitated or afraid or something, but it's starting to wear on him a little bit. Now, we are so close to the end of this right here. So when Gary just stopped it right there, you heard Trump. He said, all right, let's take one more question. And then when he does, you're going to see Vance want to add in something, because Vance is going to say something that's kind of tag teaming off what Trump just said by saying, hey, we're going to go and try some diplomacy here, because and his focus is on the previous administration. It's not on Zelensky at all, but watch how it unfolds.
I want to respond to this. So look, for 4 years in the United States of America, we had a president who stood up at press conferences and talked tough about Vladimir Putin, and then Putin invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden, of thumping our chest and pretending that the president of the United States' words mattered more than the president of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
Can I ask you?
Okay, and now stop right there. Okay, so now here you see Vance. He was turning, and saying something bad about Biden. Loves to do that. A lot of the guys from the current administration do. So there's nothing unusual about that. All Zelensky had to do at this point is say nothing. But Trump was ready to end the press conference. He literally said one more question. J.D. Vance said that he was ready to move on. Then they go back, into other rooms, or the press leaves, and then they can have whatever conversations that they want to have. But instead, he took exception to that, because you can also tell that Zelensky was really upset about the vision that Vance said, which he said it's the absence of diplomacy that has led to the war and the continuation on it. But Zelensky says, yeah, about that.
Yeah. Okay. So he occupied our parts, big parts of Ukraine, parts of East and Crimea. So he occupied it on 2014. So during a lot of years, I'm not speaking about just Biden, but those time was Obama, then President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, now President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014, nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people. You know what the contact
2015.
2014.
2014 and
2014.
Yeah. So
I was not here.
Yeah, but
that's exactly right.
Yes, but during 2014 till 2022, the situation the same. The people are been dying on the contact line. Nobody stopped him. You know that we had conversations with him, a lot of conversation, my bilateral conversation, and we signed with him. Me, like a new president. In 2019, I signed with him the deal. I signed with him, Macron and Merkel. We signed ceasefire. Ceasefire. All of them told me that he will never go. We signed him with gas contract. Gas contract. Yes, but after that, he broke this ceasefire. He killed our people, and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners.
Okay. Now, up to this point, you can see Trump is kind of maybe a little bored. He sees this long history lesson. Pardon me. He's not paying much attention to it. But what J.D. Vance is paying attention to it, because what he just said, I don't know if Trump caught it at the moment, but what Zelensky had just said up to the point where we just stopped is that basically you can't trust Putin. He's not going to keep his word. And he details all these things that happened from 2013, really, and 2014 specifically, all the way up through to the start of this war here. And he claimed that I had Merkel and he said Macron, in 2019, they told me Putin's never going to do this, but he did anyway. So you can't trust Putin. So he's telling you that what President Trump just said is wrong. You can't have a negotiated settlement with Putin because he's not going to abide by the agreement. Now, what Vance is also aware of is that all the things that Zelensky said are partially true. All the detail and the listing of things that he put in there are partially true, but they weren't the whole truth. He left out some huge parts. He left out that the Western negotiators of that Minsk agreement had never intended for it to be followed and never wanted them, never put pressure on Ukraine to follow it. And when Zelensky came into office, he forgot to mention that he signed a law in March of 2021 that said they were going to retake all of the territories that they had lost, to include Crimea. So that set the stage. That's what set the spark for this. And the Ukraine side never implemented the most important part of the Minsk agreements. He left all of that out. So instead, he only talks about how the Russians were killing some of the Ukraine people, which they did. He doesn't mention all of the Ukraine people that Zelensky's forces killed on the eastern side of the line of contact. Ukrainian people. We forget about that. We keep thinking that the Russians were helping them. So the Russians, and we conveniently forget that that's Ukrainian territory and Ukrainian people. They were fighting a civil war. He forgot to mention that too. So now then you have Vance is starting to get to a slow boil because he knows a lot of these facts. He's written on this stuff even before even when he was the vice presidential candidate while he was a senator. So he knows this stuff really well. If Zelensky had just stopped right there, he might still have been okay. But then he went one step further and he calls out the vice president by first name, leaning into him and embarrasses him.
But he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going
and stop right there. And that'll actually be enough of that. So again, this could have ended right there. It would have been an embarrassment, but they could have moved on. You saw Vance tried to shut it down and said, hey, we're not going to litigate this in front of the media right here. And then Vance went a little bit too far and called out Zelensky. And Zelensky is apparently not one to take insults very lightly either. And you all know what happened after that, all the back and forths. But the bottom line is that Zelensky had every opportunity to get this off the table. And even more importantly, that he was going down a path that the United States had not agreed to. The whole situation, this was set up, was for Zelensky to come to the United States and to sign the minerals deal. And then they were going to talk about ending the war, et cetera. So that was a singular situation there. And as you're about to see from some of the other American officials, they were none too happy about that. And probably the person least happy about it was Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
We just heard from President Zelensky. He said he does not think that he owes President Trump an apology for what happened inside the Oval Office today. Do you feel otherwise?
I do, because you guys don't see, you guys only saw the end. You saw what happened today. You don't see all the things that led up to this. So let me explain. The president's been very clear. He campaigned on this. He thinks this war should have never started. He believes, and I agree, that had he been president, it never would have happened. Now here we are. He's trying to bring an end to this conflict. We've explained very clearly what our plan is here, which is we want to get the Russians to a negotiating table. We want to explore whether peace is possible. They understand this. They also understand that this agreement that was supposed to be signed today was supposed to be an agreement that binds America economically to Ukraine, which to me, as I've explained, and I think the president alluded to today, is a security guarantee in its own way, because we're involved. It's now us. It's our interests. That was all explained. That was all understood. And nonetheless, for the last 10 days, in every engagement we've had with the Ukrainians, there's been complications in getting that point across, including the public statements that President Zelensky has made. But they insisted on coming to D.C. This agreement could have been signed 5 days ago, but they insisted on coming to Washington. And there was and should have been a very clear understanding. Don't come here and create a such scenario where you're going to start lecturing us about how diplomacy isn't going to work.
Yeah, and you see that there about the lecturing us diplomacy. Nobody should think that the vice president of the United States and sitting right next to the president in the Oval Office, when they have actually changed their view to move a little bit in Zelensky's favor, because the first Trump didn't want to give any guarantees of any sort, but then he's like, okay, we'll do this minerals deal, which will tie us to a degree into Ukraine's future. It's not military, but it is a tie in the United States in, and would put any president, whether Trump or somebody in the future, into a tight spot if the war expanded and Americans were killed in the process. So it is an issue. It's, kind of the famous tripwire, just not with military forces. So it was something. It was not what Zelensky wanted, though. That's the big issue. And Zelensky wasn't interested in something he didn't want. And apparently he had lots of experience with that with the previous administration, where he could cajole Biden into doing things. We saw that play out so many times. Biden said, we're not going to give jets, and we're not going to give all these things, and we're not going to give tanks, et cetera, only to go back and do it later, because Zelensky was able to pressure him into doing so. He badgered him into doing so. So Zelensky had some experience with that working with the American president. He thought that it would continue to happen here. You saw the Secretary Rubio emphatically said, we told them that's not on the table. This is on the table. And that's the only thing on the table. Or we could have signed it on, you could have just signed it. It could have been done like that. But Zelensky wanted the image and the power of the visuals sitting in the Oval Office, in the White House, the symbol of American power. He wanted that. Fair enough. No problem with that. As long as you follow the script. He's supposed to be a good actor, but instead he went off script. And then he first agitated and then outright attacked verbally his hosts by saying, JD, what diplomacy are you talking about? And by just ridiculing everything the president had said, and then directly confronting the vice president. Now, lots of those who already don't like Trump and Vance are only focusing on the fact that it turned into a yell fest. And there's some justification to that. Probably it shouldn't have happened. But nobody should be surprised that it did, because there's not many people that are going to be, allow that kind of thing to happen on camera in their own home. Nobody should expect those to do it, and they definitely shouldn't expect those two to do that. Anyone should know that. So one of the other fallouts is it's not just, it's the host that were upset, but even some of his allies, Zelensky's allies in the United States, are also really angry. So this is not going well for Zelensky so far. You may recall Lindsey Graham, we've shown this a bunch of times. He's been one of the biggest supporters that Zelensky personally has had, even going further than Trump in many cases. He went to Munich Security Conference a week or so ago, made that famous, statement we've shown several times about how he's been looking for an ally like you, and we need to arm you to the teeth and give you all this stuff that you're asking for. That's where Graham has been, which is a lot further than Trump. But man, after that meeting, Lindsey Graham is singing a different tune.
So, what I think, complete, utter disaster. I've been to Ukraine 8 or 9 times since the war started. I understand the consequences of Putin's actions against Ukraine. I appreciate what the Ukrainian people have done. They fought like tigers. At the end of the day, I was hoping that this minerals deal, which would be transformative in the relationship, would go over well. I talked to Zelensky this morning. Don't take the bait. President Trump was in a very good mood last night. Somebody asked me, am I embarrassed about Trump? I have never been more proud of the president. I was very proud of J.D. Vance standing up for our country. We want to be helpful. What I saw in the Oval Office was disrespectful, and I don't know if we can ever do business with Zelensky again.
Ouch, that is pretty harsh. I don't know if we can do business with Zelensky again. The Bible says a brother lost is harder to win back than anybody, and I'm afraid we may see that play out here, because if you can't take the one guy who's been the biggest advocate for you in the U.S. government and then alienate him like that. And you heard why Graham was upset, because he said he had talked to him that morning. He said, don't take the bait. That implies that he said, look, if anybody tries to bait you with something, don't get into an argument. And he also said, and we'll play this clip now, actually, he also said, look, I told you, it's the minerals deal first and then negotiations second.
I told Zelensky, we'll talk about security guarantees. We'll talk about ceasefires and how the war ends. This is a process. You have a new relationship with America, a $500 billion, $500 billion deal that President Trump is proud of, that gives us an interest worth defending. Let's talk about the positive. But he was terrible at Munich, Zelensky, and I think he has made it almost impossible to sell to the American people that he's a good investment, that he is a good business partner.
Do you think President Zelensky needs to resign to resume these peace talks?
He either needs to resign and send somebody over that we can do business with, or he needs to change.
Oh, even harsher now. I mean, now that actually says you should resign. And it's very unclear what's going to happen. I can't imagine Zelensky resigning. I can't expect that at all. But the question is going to be, okay, now what? Because you've alienated President Trump, you've alienated the vice president, you've alienated the Senator Graham. That's not the end of the alienation.
He went to Europe. They treat them like a conquering hero. They want World War III. They want war with Russia. They signed, and the Democrats is helping them.
List. Apparently Trump was even more upset than we thought, as Mike Walls, National Security Advisor, said this.
I think what has the president so frustrated and frankly angry is that it's not clear that Zelensky truly wants to stop the fighting. And he came in, even though he was warned not to, determined to litigate all of that in front of the entire world.
And so you see now a developing theme. Zelensky was told, we're not going to go down the negotiating for the end of the war path. That's not the purpose of this right here. That's subsequent. We're going to get this done first. You saw Graham tell him. Of course, Rubio had been talking about it. Other negotiators had been talking about it. Kellogg had been talking about it. Everyone has been signaling consistently. One of the few times that the White House has been really on point and on message across the board is on this. And so then you had Zelensky going off script and trying to take it somewhere that everyone told him, don't take it. Take the win here, and then we'll continue to fight on those other diplomatic fronts. But instead he didn't. And then it went on even further, because then Walls is saying, now then we're starting to wonder, does Zelensky even want peace at all?
When you went in and explained to Zelensky that he was leaving the White House without lunch or that important signing, did he seem to recognize what had happened?
No, he didn't, frankly. His team did. His ambassador and his advisor were practically, they were practically in tears, wanting this to move forward. But Zelensky was still argumentative. And finally, what I said, look, Mr. President, time is not on your side on the battlefield. Time is not on your side in terms of the world situation. I think he is used to hearing, actually, I know he is used to hearing that as long as it takes, as much as it takes, blank check, and the United States really doesn't have much of a say, you can determine the outcome of all of this. That's what he heard for years from Biden, and he has not gotten the memo that this is a new sheriff in town, this is a new president, and we are determined to take a new approach towards peace.
And then we actually got to hear from Zelensky himself. After the debacle there in front of everybody, he then went on Fox News last night, and Bret Baier asked him point blank, do you want to fight or do you want peace?
Do you want to continue fighting? Do you want peace? And if he had the opportunity to go back to the White House right now, would you do it?
No. First of all, we want peace. That's why I'm in the United States. That's why I visited President Trump. And thanks for invitation again. The deal on minerals is the first step to security guarantees. It's meant for the peace, closer to peace. That's why I'm here. And we have tough situation. To understand it is to be in Ukraine. You saw it, Brett. You was once. Thank you again. So I think that's very important to understand what's going on. But I respect my soldiers and our people, our civilians who work and support our warriors. I can't say just stop. Nobody will stop because everybody afraid that Putin will come back tomorrow. We want just and lasting peace. It's true. We want security guarantees. We raised this topic about NATO the quickest way, but not all the countries are on this side. I said, okay, if not NATO, nobody is pushing. If not NATO, let's build NATO in Ukraine. That's my position. Europeans are ready to have contingents on our territory, boots on the ground. United States thinks maybe to help, maybe USA backstop have to be just to guarantee that they are with the Europeans.
Okay, he is completely detached from reality. Everybody in the White House has told him there's not going to be any security guarantees. Trump has specifically said NATO is not going to happen. Days ago, just days ago, he said that. And now here, after the debacle, after all that had happened, after he had been told behind the scenes by Mike Waltz what was at stake, he goes on Fox News and says, I'm looking for NATO. We'll build NATO in Ukraine. Even though that's like waving a red flag in front of a charging bull. That's NATO has been the reason for the war in the first place. That's why it's not on the table and never will be. He says he wants EU peacekeeping troops. Russian President both Putin and Sergei Lavrov have categorically said that's not even possible because that basically is NATO in Ukraine, the very reason we went to war. Then he says he wants a U.S. guaranteed backstop for those troops there. So if they get attacked, we Article 5 and we come in on the attack. That you're arguing for that right now in light of everything that's been done shows graphically why the United States should not have him at the negotiating table when they're talking to Russia, because he can't think rationally. Listen, I know a lot of people, and probably watching this show right now, think Zelensky is in the hero badge and they're mad at the way Trump treated him. Fair enough. You can have your opinion. Those are fine. But when you see that this guy simply cannot mentally get to the point to where he sees that's not on the table, that's not even up for negotiations, it's not even for discussions, it's been clearly articulated, and he's still staying with it now. That, of course, leads to the fact that the realities on the ground, the combat conditions, all the inputs that I talk about all the time are not just irrevocably in Russia's favor, but they're continuing to grow. Even today, the imbalance grows in Russia's favor. Ukraine has no leverage. Trump, in part of his tirade there when he was really aggravated, said you have no cards. This is what he means. Trump is aware and recognizes, as many on his staff do, that this is militarily unattainable. It just will never happen. It can't happen. It's as close to physically as impossible as you can get. And yet Zelensky can't recognize that. He shouldn't need anyone in the U.S. administration to point that out. It's self-evidently true. We can see it from the studios here of Daniel Davis Deep Dive from near Washington, D.C. You know, we haven't even been on there, but we don't need to because the facts and the fundamentals are as evident as they can be, as though I were physically on the ground there. And yet, Volodymyr Zelensky cannot come to the point. And I think that he believes what he's saying. And that's the dangerous part. If you believe that you have leverage, that you can hold out and keep fighting, then what you're doing is you're condemning and dooming your own people to death. More people will die for a war that should have been over, should have never started, but it should have been over years ago, definitely years ago. And instead, he has refused every off-ramp. And now here he's offered one more golden opportunity, and he is trying to destroy that as well. And then Mike Walls actually went a little bit further. Mike Walls went a little bit further where he's saying, no, I'm sorry, skipping that one. Back to Zelensky himself. Brett Baer continued on that conversation. And in light of all of his comments there, he just said, okay, implying that if you stick with that plan and Trump sticks with what he says and he's not going to go any further and you may be on your own, can you fight this war on your own?
So the question today is, can Ukraine win this war or hold off Russia without continued U.S. support?
It will be difficult for us. That's why I'm here. That's why we speak about the future negotiations. It will be difficult without your support, but we can't lose our values, our people. We can't lose our freedom. So a lot of people, Russians came to our territory, you know it. Russians came to our houses, and everybody saw it, video, images, a lot of things. They killed so many people. Just to forget it, just to say that Putin is a great guy? No, without us.
I understand the emotion. Putin did invade your country. He has killed lots of people, probably over 1 million to all total. I think when the truth comes out, we'll see that that's the case. He has devastated entire portions of your country, just turned it to literal dust where cities used to lie. There's no doubt about that. Who would ever like the person that's in doing that to your country? You have every reason to hate them. Straight, any human would. I can only imagine that that's the case. But for you to then say, in spite of all of this, that if the U.S. withdraws its support or just doesn't give you any more because we haven't offered any since the last of the Biden administration, that you can fight on without the United States is lunacy. There's no kinder way to put it. They won't last a month without the United States. If we withdraw all of our support, we withdraw all of our CIA assets that are there, people that are helping with intelligence, with targeting, anybody who was helping with any of the military things, training, etc. If we just pull that out lock, stock, and barrel, what you would almost certainly see among the Ukrainian military is what similar happened when the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan. When the military folks in the U.S. left, then the Ukraine side psychologically thought, now we're on our own. And the Afghan people knew that wasn't going to work, and the whole thing just fell apart and they collapsed. And they made deals with the Taliban, whatever they needed to do. Something similar was very likely. I can't guarantee this because it's human emotions and dynamics that are in some parts different. But it is being very, very possible that the Ukraine military, if they know they lose the psychological support of the United States and they just say, you're on your own, figure it out with Europe or whatever you want to do, then you see that there's going to be a real problem, and there's the possibility of a collapse of the Ukraine army would be there. But even if there wasn't a collapse and they just somehow maintained that will to fight, they can't succeed. They will be defeated. And Zelensky seems prepared to go down that path. And you know for sure that that's actually what President Trump is thinking, because after all of this stuff happened and before he left town, he said this.
I'm looking for peace. We're not looking to go into a 10-year war and play games. We want peace. And it was just my impression that if we do that, if we sign up, he's looking for something that I'm not looking for. He's looking to go on and fight. We're looking to end the death.
So you see, Trump is very consistent with what he said. And you're talking all the way back to 2023 when he was running for president. He's never said anything besides this. How then can you have the leader of Ukraine, who may want to change that all day long, and you can understand why he would desire to do that, but Trump is not going to do that. So at some point, even somebody like Zelensky has to come to the reality that they can look at the military balance of power, they can look at the losses on the battlefield, they can see the raw materials that both sides still have left. It's way up here for the Russians, and they're scraping the bottom of the barrel here, and can see that if you psychologically lose the support of the United States, that it's going to be an incredible burden onto your fighters who are left, that you have to say, all right, we're just going to have to make a deal with here. But if Zelensky has been unwilling to recognize the balance of power that he can't win on the battlefield up to this point, then it's not surprising that he's unwilling to acknowledge diplomatically he can't force Trump into doing what he wants. And that puts a dangerous path to where Ukraine's going to go. And if you think that Trump wouldn't leave, he also added this.
Well, he says he wants it now. He wants to come back right now, but I can't do that. Ceasefire, that was the other thing. He didn't want to do about ceasefire. A ceasefire could take place immediately. A contract, if you want to end the war, you sign up an agreement. That's going to take a period of time. It takes time. I want it to end immediately. And I think if you had a ceasefire, it would be a ceasefire, a real one, that would end it. But he doesn't want to do that. That's fine. Do it better.
You see what he said? If you want to do it, just let it go. You can fight it out yourself. He said subsequently to that. So Trump is willing to walk. He's done it before at the highest levels. He walked away from a deal that he had with Kim Jong-un when he was at in Vietnam, in Hanoi, and all the pomp and circumstance. So even in something like that, he was willing to walk away. And of course, I've argued that he shouldn't have walked away from that one, but that's not the point at this minute. He is willing to walk if he thinks that there's something that he can't deal with somebody. If he thinks that he doesn't have a rational partner, he'll walk, and whatever happens, happens. And I'm sure that, in fact, even as we were coming on this TV here, or on this show, there was a lot of images in Europe that Zelensky was landing in the UK, and he was going to go and talk to Keir Starmer and probably Emmanuel Macron and have some other conversations with other European leaders. I'm sure he's trying to say, hey, how's about you guys backstop us? How's about you do all the things we were asking Trump to do here? And I don't know if you remember, but Keir Starmer, in all of his enthusiasm about wanting to do this and about saying we're willing to put UK boots on the ground and planes in the air to backstop this, even he said, as long as the U.S. is there to backstop us. But he is not willing to put his troops on the line, especially when Secretary of Defense Hegseth has said, if y'all do put troops in there, it won't be Article 5 troops. There won't be any of that. So if y'all get into Ukraine, you end up getting into a war with Russia, it won't have a NATO backstop. We won't provide that because the United States, Article 5, by the way, is not just if anything ever happens for any reason, we're going to be sucked into a war. Article 5 says an attack on one will be considered an attack on all. And this is the part that most people don't get, the and. It also says then each country and in their legislative process and in their constitutional process will determine how they should respond. There is no automatic guaranteed trigger that everybody will be at war if one person is at war. People don't know that. That's the way it's actually written. And Trump is keenly aware of that. But even then, they're saying, don't think we'll come into. If you take the risk of putting yourself into a position to where an opposing force has already said, if you enter into the zone of conflict without our approval and our agreement, without a UN mandate, UN Security Council mandate, where they have a veto, they said, without that, we'll consider you enemy combatants like everybody else who's there, and we'll fight you. If the UK and France do that, put troops in there, and then Russia does what they said, it would be foolish for the United States to get in there. One of the other things that Trump said emphatically yesterday, we are not going to get sucked into a world war because you are not willing to acknowledge reality. He's saying that to Europe as much as he's saying it to Zelensky. And he is the president of the United States. He's not the president of the world. He's not the president of the UN. He's not even the president of NATO. He's the president of our country. And it's his obligation to keep America out of any wars that don't need to be fought. Unless we're attacked a la Pearl Harbor or something, you don't send in the military, because all you're going to do is get your people killed, and it could go nuclear against a nuclear power. That would be the height of foolishness. So where do we go from here? What's going to happen now? As I mentioned, Zelensky's in Europe right now. They're trying to figure out what's going on. We had Larry Johnson on yesterday, who was watching a lot of the British media, and they were just thinking this is a complete disaster because, they had just sent Starmer and Macron to the White House to try and lobby Trump and just at least ooch him in their direction. And he's not willing, he at least publicly hasn't been willing to do anything different than what he said before. But they're trying to, carry this very carefully so that they don't alienate Trump, because they all know, all the Europeans know, that this war is basically over, and they're looking to interests that go beyond that. So they don't want to alienate the United States, because they still want us to be part of NATO. They still want that Article 5 guarantee in case they're attacked, and they also want the nuclear umbrella that goes along with it, and the gravitas of having the U.S. like they've been for the last 80 years. So if Zelensky thinks that they're going to commit national suicide to help him when Trump just offloaded it and said, we're not going down that path, I think that he's going to be pretty surprised here. But and now, who is the biggest winner so far? I don't think there's any question. The biggest winner is Vladimir Putin. And for all those who agree with Zelensky, that Putin is the evil guy, he's the bad guy, he's the villain in the story, then you should be mad at Zelensky for creating a situation and perpetuating it in such a way that it actually benefits his nemesis, because that's exactly what happened here. I showed you on the video, and we walked through it bit by bit. There were several places all he had to do was keep his tongue, and then the things that had already been agreed to would have played out. There would have been the press conference, there would have been the signing ceremony, all those things. He would have had that. That would have deepened America's involvement in there. That's something that would have been beneficial to him. Just consider where we are now versus where we would have been had Zelensky simply kept his mouth closed. He would have had the minerals deal. He would have had the tie-in of American business, and they would be on a path to have America continue its involvement one way or the other. May have even included some military supplies, etc., depending on how that was still up for negotiations, especially along with Europe. Now then, because he chose to, quote, be brave and to stand up to the bully, as many of his backers have said, he has no deal. He has no support from the United States. He has no path to that. And now he may even lose what he has had. So you can sit there and argue that, well, it was undignified of Vance to take the bait. Vance did take the bait because he was being prodded by Zelensky there, as I showed you, or that Trump shouldn't have blown up on him. You can make those arguments. Those are valid to consider. But as I pointed out, for the guy who's in the position of inferiority, and that's not a comment on his value, it's just a comment on the relative power between the two sides. He's on the bottom side of it. He needs the United States. The United States most definitely does not need Ukraine. So in that environment, it is the height of foolishness and diplomatic absurdities to call out the two leaders on the floor of their symbol of all their power in the White House. He should never have done that. And so now then he has handed a huge victory to Russia. That's just a fact. Again, opinions don't matter in this point. He is definitely the winner, and they're loving what's been happening. That's for sure. And so who's the biggest loser? Well, you may think Zelensky. No, the biggest loser is the Ukrainian people. The Ukrainian soldiers who were in the field, who are fighting a war that should have ended long ago, that has no possibility of ending good for their country. And instead of getting closer to a ceasefire that Trump wanted, you saw how emphatic he said that a second ago, and to an end of war termination through negotiations that would have ended the killing. Now then they are just beside themselves. They have to be of hoping that was going to turn into something that was going to end the war. And instead now seeing their leaders saying, no, I'm going to keep fighting. Even without Americans, I'm going to keep fighting. Folks, those guys know that are on the front line. They know the truth. I've been on the front lines too. I was in Afghanistan, and I knew the truth that was going on those front lines, despite all of the rhetoric that was being said in the public's face here. And the same thing is true here. Those folks on the front line know the truth. They know they don't have enough troops. We've shown you many of their comments that have been on video. Many of the troops of the Ukraine troops, they said they don't have enough troops. They don't have enough training. They don't have enough ammunition. They don't have enough kit. They don't have enough of anything. And Russia has enough of every bit of it. They know that. And that's why the lines keep moving to the west. And they are the biggest losers because now more of them are going to have to unnecessarily die. People who are alive right now while we're making this video, who are alive right now and breathing, are going to be dead tomorrow. More will be dead the day after that, and the day after and the day after. And none of it will change the outcome. The war is already determined. It has been a loss for the Ukraine side. For all the support NATO has given it, it's a loss. And the sooner we can come to realize that and recognize it, the better. So it could be, as ugly as it will be, and as much furor as it's going to get in the Western media and certainly in portions of the United States, if Trump makes good on his threat and says, I'm going to walk. You can continue to fight on your own. You said you could. We wish you the best. We're going to move on. People will say that's cruel. I argue that's the best thing he can do. That's what's needed the most, because that could cause to accelerate the physical end of this war and get it over with quickly. Understand this as we close today. There is no good deal for the Ukraine side anymore. There was a good deal in Minsk. There was a good deal in December 2021. There was a less bad deal in April of 2022. And June 2024 was a less good deal, more now in the bad. And every time the conditions have gotten worse for Ukraine. Every time Zelensky has refused a negotiated settlement, the conditions have gotten worse. And now then they're worse still. But at this point, they still can get bad, more bad. If he doesn't make a deal right now, then almost certainly he is condemning his country to a physical defeat. Russia will not stop fighting. They have been very clear about that. They will continue to pursue this until they have conquered all the territory they think they need for security. And then they will demilitarize whatever's left to a degree that they choose. And then there won't be negotiations. There won't be anybody talking. There won't be any positions available, no leveraging. There'll just be whatever terms that Putin issues. That is the cost if Zelensky doesn't change course now. And I think that the likelihood is that Trump is going to keep going down this path. It's always possible that someone could convince him to go back to the minerals deal if Zelensky's willing to come back and do it. I doubt that. It's 50-50 chance, I guess. I don't know if Zelensky's going to do it because he was given multiple opportunities to apologize. And he says, no, I'm not going to apologize. I don't think I need to, which, of course, with Trump is not a good situation to be in. So if somebody's not apologizing that Trump believes should, it seems pretty unlikely he's going to do a deal that would benefit that person. We'll see how it all plays out. But my big worry, as it always has been, as it always will be, is on the Ukrainian people. That we have said so many times that the Biden administration, that all of these European administrations have been saying, they claim to support. Our policies have enabled more of them to die. And that's where we are right now. And so I hope Trump changes that, because I want to see the killing stopped even more than he does, I believe. And it seems that he does. Thank you very much for joining us on this Saturday edition.
You want me to say really terrible things about Putin and then say, hi, Vladimir, how are we doing on the deal? That doesn't work that way. I'm not aligned with Putin. I'm not aligned with anybody. I'm aligned with the United States of America.
We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the president of the United States' words mattered more than the president of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have.
I have been to
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
Not even you, but you have nice ocean. And don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
Feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't have to play cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
If you will speak very loudly about the war,
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country's in big trouble.
Can I?
Wait a minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning. You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of
Mr. President. We are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks.
You haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet.
You haven't been alone. We gave you through this stupid president $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military equipment.
You
and you've been a brave, but they had to use our military.
What about West?
If you didn't have our military equipment,
you invited me to
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days. I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something
maybe
new.
Less.
In 2 weeks. Of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this. I tell you.
Say thank you.
I said a lot of
Except that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on. I think it's very important. That's why I kept this going so long.
Hello, my friends. I hope you're all doing well. Today is Saturday, the 1st of March, and this is my first video update of the day. Where do I even begin with this? I mean, you know where this is going, right? The conversation in between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. Or I should probably say the shouting match, because that's exactly what it was. I don't think that in the history of the United States was there another occasion when a foreign leader visited the White House, the Oval Office, and has attempted to humiliate a sitting US president to that extent. That's exactly what Volodymyr Zelensky has done. However, in this episode, I just want us to take a step back and try to understand how all of this began, because I'm sure there's a backstory to it, even though we don't know it just yet. I must preface this by saying that I've watched it about 3 times. The first time I've watched it just like anybody else, just to see what's going on. And it was almost unwatchable at times, cringy to put it mildly. However, then I've watched it the second time, and what I've done, I've just paid attention to Zelensky's body language. And then I've watched it the third time and looked at Trump. How did Trump react? What actually caused all of this? And what I've learned from the 3 viewings is that Volodymyr Zelensky was there from the very beginning with this mindset, this antagonistic mindset of correcting Trump, of correcting course. And you can tell that from his body language. Speaking of his body language, I don't want to be disrespectful, but he was doing a lot of things with the nose and a lot of sniffing. I'm not going to get into that, but it's so apparent, it's almost cringy. Point being, Volodymyr Zelensky was not there, as you saw him numerous times with the Europeans, and even with Joe Biden. He wasn't relaxed. He was very tense from the get-go. And I tried to come up with a theory to why what exactly caused this. Now, we know that this meeting was about the mineral deal. So what can possibly set Volodymyr Zelensky off to that extent? Now, if I've read that correctly, based on the conversation that the two leaders had, I think I've come to a conclusion. Volodymyr Zelensky wanted to visit the White House and have a conversation with Trump prior to this televised conversation, the public, the things that they put out for the people. Because that's exactly what he stated just a few days ago, and I've covered it. He listed a few things that he wanted to bring up in his conversations with Trump, in the private conversation. But I don't think that there has been a private conversation, and this angered him. Probably Donald Trump just welcomed him to the White House, shook hands, and went straight in. And I think that's exactly what set him off. Because Donald Trump began that, let's call it a press conference, even though it wasn't, began that press conference by talking about peace and ceasefires, etc. Volodymyr Zelensky, from the very beginning, he was very much opposed to that. He said, well, yes, but the Russians were the ones that came. Yes, but you can't trust Putin. And he carried on for about 30-something minutes. Up until, and by the way, you could see it escalating through the first 30 minutes. It went from bad to worse. He was speaking at the same time as Trump was speaking. He was interrupting Trump. Then he addressed J.D. Vance, and that was the final nail. He said to J.D. Vance, well, do you think that if you speak loudly, well, first of all, a green t-shirt, how J.D. Vance speaks is none of your business because he speaks in his house. You're there as a guest. And by the way, J.D. Vance actually spoke very softly, so I don't know where Zelensky got the loud part from, but it doesn't matter. Point being, you don't say that to the United States officials in the Oval Office. You don't do it. But Zelensky has done it nonetheless, because this is exactly how the Europeans have gotten him used to. Wherever he goes in Europe, he just says what he wants and does what he wants, and everybody just bows down and gives him a standing ovation. Well, not in the White House. And the questions that Trump got from the journalists, you could see they angered Zelensky, because Trump was responding to a question and then he passed it on to the next journalist to ask the next question. But Volodymyr Zelensky, just watch it, please. He was doing like, am I not going to speak here? And eventually, he just pushed himself to answer one of the questions that was actually meant for Donald Trump. Donald Trump, of course, he remained steadfast. Again, I've watched a third time just to observe Donald Trump. Trump is a very good negotiator. I think we can all conclude that. He did not give a single indication, maybe half an indication at some point, that he's angry. He just let it slide, just played it cool, very composed. Zelensky was everything but. And this makes me raise a point. Many people say that Zelensky was a good actor. That's if he ever was a good actor, let's just say that his acting skills are way behind him, because an actor should know better than anybody else on the planet how to contain your emotions, how to keep your composure. And he has proven exactly the opposite yesterday. Point being, Donald Trump, he said it in the press conference, I don't want to be on Ukraine's side or on the Russian side. I want to be in the middle, because that's how you're going to get these two parties who don't exactly like each other to come together. But you see, that answer was not good enough for Volodymyr Zelensky. And then when Trump said, I'm committed to Poland because they're spending money, NATO and all of that, Volodymyr Zelensky said, well, if you don't do something about it, then one day, your soldiers will have to fight. And that's exactly what set off the whole thing. Because Trump said, well, hold on a second, you don't know that. And from there, I think the rest you know very well. I mean, it's probably the most watched press conference in the history of press conferences by this point, and for a good reason. You just don't do that. You don't go to the United States and do this. So, where now? I personally think that Donald Trump at this point has two options, and I'm sure he's going to exercise a little bit of both. Let me explain. Trump mentioned months ago that his approach will be very simple. Position himself in the middle and support the party that wants peace and go against the party which does not. And I think after this meeting yesterday, I think it's safe to say Volodymyr Zelensky is not a great fan of peace. Let's just put it that way. And we knew this, and we talked about it on the channel for a long time, and so did millions of other people. But Donald Trump, again, he tried to maintain that positioning in the middle approach, and he said, no, Zelensky wants peace, Zelensky wants peace. Also, it was about the mineral deal, which, by the way, there is no more mineral deal. It completely fell through, but we're going to touch on that later. Point being, at this stage, the entire world has seen exactly who wants peace and who doesn't want peace. And the journalists in the room, they've asked Trump, well, what makes you think that Putin wants peace? And Trump basically said, well, look, I trust him because I know him for a long time. However, we've seen exactly who was in that room, who wasn't a big fan of peace. Now, point being, I've said Trump may exercise a little bit of both options. Option number one is to stick to what he said. Basically, go against the party that doesn't want peace. That means he can cut more Ukraine aid, or he can, and I'm sure, and by the way, we have an article, apparently something is already in motion. And then option number two is to let all of this just play out, cool down, and then resume conversations with Zelensky and try to get him back to some more common sense. I think it's going to be a mix of both, but I think this will not go without repercussions because you just don't do that. People say, I mean, by people, I mean the fake news, as Donald Trump calls them. The fake news claims that Trump humiliated Zelensky. That's not what happened. Trump, in fact, he remained composed, even as Zelensky was trying to speak on top of him and interrupt him numerous times. Trump didn't say a word. And actually, watching that, I was thinking, when is Trump going to react? But in the end, Zelensky made it impossible for Trump to remain silent because he became so disrespectful to the point he simply could no longer be ignored. And again, where is all of this going to go? Well, not good for Zelensky, that's for sure. Also, it's important to note that in the second episode later on today, we're going to take a look at the reaction from the Europeans. Oh, there's been plenty of reactions, and I think you can already imagine what sort of reactions. It was almost unwatchable. And point being, Zelensky, after he stormed out of the White House, by the way, there was no lunch, no press conference signing the deal, none of that. Zelensky just stormed out of the White House, and then he went to Fox, and he gave a little interview, you see. And in that interview, I've watched it, I think it's only 5 or 6 minutes, it's not long. Basically, he said, well, the relationship between US and Ukraine are far more important than the relationship between two presidents. Well, how should we put it? In a general sense, yes, the relationship between two countries is more important than those countries' presidents. However, in this instance, I don't think this applies, because you see, it's exactly up to Donald Trump himself what he's gonna do moving forward vis-a-vis Volodymyr Zelensky. So the relationship between the countries is almost irrelevant in this sense. I don't think he fully understands just how much he needs the United States. Donald Trump, that was one of the best part of the of the press conference. Basically, Trump said to Zelensky, look, without our support, you would have been finished in about 2 weeks. And Volodymyr Zelensky said, yeah, in about 3 days. I've heard it from Putin before. How can you say that? I mean, he's accused Trump numerous times of spreading Putin propaganda. And he's done it again in the Oval Office, live on television. This is not smart, to put it mildly. After all, I think it's important to understand that whatever set Zelensky off to that path, it happened long before that meeting began. I think that's the most important takeaway for me, because again, pay attention to his body language from the first minute. It wasn't a body language of somebody who's relaxed, who's in their element, who's looking forward to something. Oh no, it was the complete opposite. And something had to set him on that path. Again, my theory is the fact that Donald Trump probably refused to further negotiate the deal because that's what Zelensky tried. He tried to take that mineral deal and transform it into some sort of first step of many steps towards security guarantees for Ukraine. And Trump made it clear in the press conference, oh, no. This is for payment for what we've already given you. Now, that approach being right or wrong, moral or not, that's not up for debate in this episode. What's important to take away is that Volodymyr Zelensky saw this deal as something else. Look, Donald, we're going to give you this, but you'll have to agree to this, that, and the other, boots on the ground. And Zelensky shouted in that press conference saying, well, the Europeans, they will never commit their contingents to Ukraine unless there's a US backstop. And he made that point very clear. However, I don't think Zelensky and the Europeans understand that for the Russians, this is something unacceptable, and Russia won't take any of that. By the way, there was an interview with Vladimir Putin about 4 days ago, in which Putin said, the Europeans cannot make any demands in all of this, especially from Russia. He said, let them demand from someone else. And we know exactly who that someone else is. The Russians won't budge on that. But the Europeans keep pushing forward because they're in a struggle for relevance. And Volodymyr Zelensky was defending the Europeans in the Oval Office. Trump said, well, look, we've given 350 billion. The Europeans gave about 100 and something. We gave a lot more. And Zelensky said, well, no. The Europeans helped me a lot. The Europeans gave a lot. And Trump said, yeah, it was a lot, but it was much less than what we've given. I don't think it even matters, my friends, who gave more and how much it gave, because that's entirely their problem. It was their decision. It was their decision to give aid to Ukraine. That's not important here. What's important is that Zelensky is aligning himself with the Europeans against Donald Trump. And I've said this for a long time. It was obvious, but now it became obvious to everybody. But it's important to understand who these Europeans are. These Europeans are political leaders who have made it their life's mission to stick by Volodymyr Zelensky. So, as Vladimir Putin said, it's impossible for these leaders at this stage to backtrack on any of that, because it will just result in them losing face. So, for this generation of politicians, for this political class, it's impossible to go back on anything that they've promised Zelensky. And we're gonna see that plenty of that in the second video update in a little bit. It was almost hard to watch. I try to recall a time when I've seen something similar, and I just couldn't. I don't think there's been a case like this. But it's also important to understand that these meetings, these types of shouting matches, they happen all the time, by the way. This is not an isolated incident. It happens all the time. But it happens behind closed doors. And when the leaders emerge from that room, they're all smiles and they shake hands, and nobody is the wiser. Nobody knows just how bad it was in that room. But this happened in front of cameras, live on TV. This is what makes this one so special. And one point, and I think I'll conclude with this point before we move on to the articles. One final point is that J.D. Vance, at some point in that conversation towards the end, said, well, look, if you have any problems with this mineral deal and with this entire situation, we can go and litigate those objections, but you don't do it in front of cameras. And J.D. Vance was right. But even more important, Donald Trump intervened just as J.D. Vance was finishing his sentence and said, no, I think it's actually good that this is taking place in this manner on live TV, so people can see exactly what's going on here. And I totally agree with Donald Trump. I don't think I've ever agreed with him on anything else as much as I agree with him on this one. This was needed because now people, and by people I don't mean people who are heavily leaning on either side, I mean people who are in the middle, to see this exactly for what it is. Take a look, take a good hard look, and try to understand what actually happened in there. And this is why Trump, as he said, he's allowed this to go for as long as it did. Because let's make no mistake about it, Trump could have stopped this at any point during those 50-something minutes. I think that's how long it was. He could have stopped it at any point, saying, look, guys, thank you very much. It's been very good. It's been a fantastic press conference, as Trump liked to speak, and just move on. But he didn't. He allowed it to go on full display. And that's because he wanted everybody to see exactly who wants peace and who doesn't want peace. And what's important to understand, that this is something that I don't think Zelensky appreciates. is that by doing this, Zelensky just gave Trump a blank check to do whatever he wants regarding Ukraine. He can withdraw support, he can cut support, he can minimize support, or he can do whatever he wants. Because after watching that, the American people were ultimately the ones who were disrespected. You go into the Oval Office and you put up such a performance, well, let's just say that most people in that country would not look at it favorably. Let's just leave it there. However, you know, he's very much favored in Europe. My friends, this was essentially it. I've included a few snippets at the beginning of the video. I know, Captain Obvious, you've already seen that, just to get a taste of what happened. But again, I'll urge you, if you have the time, the patience, and the desire, watch it again, the entire thing. However, watch it from a different perspective. Just pay attention to the body language. Don't even listen to what is necessarily being said. Just look at the body language, especially the one of Volodymyr Zelensky, because that body language speaks far more than he did, and he spoke a lot. Now let's go to Ukrainska Pravda, because we have Lindsey Graham, US Senator Graham. Zelensky must either resign or send someone we can do business with. Quote, I think the relationship between Ukraine and America is vitally important. But can Zelensky do a deal with the United States? After what I saw, I don't know. But Zelensky, was terrible in Munich, and I think that he has made it almost impossible to sell to the American people that he's a good investment, that he is a good business partner. Zelensky either needs to resign and send somebody over that we can do business with, or he needs to change. This is the first time, and quite possibly the only time, when I agree with Lindsey Graham. I don't think he spoke that much sense in his entire life, in all of his years put together. However, he is right. I think after that performance, it's impossible for the American people to look at Zelensky, not necessarily Ukraine, but Zelensky in particular, and think, yes, he's a good investment. Oh, that's our business partner right there. No, nobody's proud of that. However, Lindsey Graham, in Lindsey Graham fashion, he can't just have one good performance, one good interview without messing it all up. Listen to his next statement. Graham said that he met with Zelensky in the morning and told him not to take the bait. But according to the senator, the Ukrainian president's behavior in the Oval Office was disrespectful, and he didn't know whether the US would ever do business with Zelensky again. Well, I guess once Lindsey Graham, always a Lindsey Graham. He's basically suggesting that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have set off a trap for Zelensky, and he walked straight into it. I've advised Zelensky, don't take the bait. What bait? If anything, Donald Trump has tried as much as possible to not set him off, to not trigger that entire altercation, or whatever you want to call it. It was Zelensky who was relentless in his attempts to disrespect Donald Trump. First, he corrected Trump. Second, he spoke on top of Trump. Third, he actually intervened with a journalist to be him the one who answers the question that was meant for Donald Trump. How much can you tolerate? I mean, there's a point, there's a threshold, and he has passed it with flying colors. Even J.D. Vance had to step in and say, well, hold on a second, you're a little bit disrespectful. Oh, by the way, speaking of J.D. Vance, I just remembered. He said, well, you're taking people on a propaganda tour. That's what he said to Volodymyr Zelensky. You're taking people on a propaganda tour, showing to everybody just how much destruction Russia has caused. And now you're telling Mr. Trump that actually Ukraine is fine. Many of the cities of Ukraine are fine. Look, the truth is somewhere in the middle. Yes, a lot of places in Ukraine look just like before. They're untouched. Point being, for 3 years, as J.D. Vance suggested, he went around the world and showed everybody pictures. He took pictures with him yesterday at the White House, by the way. Showed everybody pictures. Look how bad the Russians are. Look what they've done. And all of a sudden, when Trump says Ukraine is flattened, he says, well, no, Mr. President, no. You have to come to Ukraine to see for yourself. Don't believe this Russian propaganda. Ukraine is fine. And that's when J.D. Vance simply couldn't take it anymore and said, well, you have taken people on a propaganda tour against the Russians, obviously, and now all of a sudden Ukraine is fine. Well, which one is it? However, let's move on from Senator Graham, because he's trying to imply that Donald Trump set a trap for Zelensky. That is definitely not the case, and anybody who watched it from the beginning to the end would understand. This is something that was just like the boiling effect. You start off slow and then you ramp it up. And all of it is Zelensky's doing. Trump didn't antagonize him with anything. If anything, Trump tried to calm him down on a few occasions before he actually set off. But my friends, I'll leave it here and I'll see you in the second episode where we're gonna take at what Ursula von der Leyen
I also wanted first to cover what was truly an extraordinary event. I mean, a historically extraordinary event that took place just a little while ago, earlier this afternoon, in the Oval Office, where Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky came to Washington primarily because he was summoned by President Trump and the Trump White House to do so. The Trump administration is very eager to reach an agreement, is one generous way to put it. Pressure the Ukrainians to agree or submit to an agreement is probably the more accurate way to put it, in which the United States will obtain very substantial rights to the crucial minerals in Ukraine, many of which are in the Donbass region that the Russians currently occupy, but many of which are simply spread throughout Western Ukraine that are crucial for industrial growth, for there's some lithium there. There's all kinds of rare earth minerals that are necessary for future weapons as well, and for a lot of other drivers of economic growth into the future that President Trump very much has his eye on. And Trump brought this suggestion, this proposal, and was a little bit ambiguous about it. Some people understood that he was offering it as a condition for continuing to fund the war in Ukraine, essentially saying to Ukraine, if you want us to continue to finance and arm your war against Russia, the condition is that you have to give us the right
All right. I'm back, y'all. 1 second.
Rare earth minerals that are necessary for future weapons as well, and for a lot of other drivers of economic growth into the future that President Trump very much has his eye on. And Trump brought this suggestion, this proposal, and was a little bit ambiguous about it. Some people understood that he was offering it as a condition for continuing to fund the war in Ukraine, essentially saying to Ukraine, if you want us to continue to finance and arm your war against Russia, the condition is that you have to give us the rights to these minerals in your ground, or 50% of it, or we become partners in it. And a lot of people, that led a lot of people, including a very good friend of our show, great friend of our show, one of our best friends of the show, Michael Tracy, to conclude that this was Trump essentially saying that he's going to continue to pursue Biden's policy of financing the war in Ukraine indefinitely. He just wants some mineral rights as a condition for doing so. There was another interpretation, though, that I think was very viable, which is that President Trump keeps saying that we gave $350 billion to apparently I sneeze even when I'm not in the studio. It's only during the show, though, live. I swear I don't sneeze ever during the day. Maybe it's just psychological. In any event, very fixated on the fact that we gave $350 billion, in his words, to Ukraine. That figure has been disputed, but clearly it's in excess of $100 billion, maybe $200 billion. And this isn't new. During the campaign over the last couple of years, he's been objecting to this and questioning it and saying, why is it in American interest? Why does the American worker have to finance the war in Ukraine? And the other alternative is that he determined to get that money back through, and he continues that he intends to end the war in Ukraine, that he intends to negotiate a deal between Ukraine and Russia for the war to end. So it's not as if he said, hey, I want to continue the war, but I just want to get mineral. Or keeps claiming that Europe's aid was in the form of loans and grants that they'll get back, some of which it was actually, but not all of which, whereas the United States just kind of gave this money with no expectation in return. So it seems more plausible to me that what Trump is saying is, we want our money back that we've given you, and you'll get the benefit that if we have a vested interest in your country and extracting these rare earth minerals out of your country, that will provide us security, because we'll have to have a physical presence there. Obviously, the way lucrative and valuable rights to these minerals, but at the same time, they have been and Trump's view is, why should we just give you this money? So this visit from obviously in a context in which Trump had Zelensky being a dictator, of elections, being extremely the war of words that took place. Trump seemed to retreat a little bit on it when UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer was in the White House yesterday on Thursday, and a reporter asked about him having called President Zelensky a dictator, and he said something like, oh, did I say that? But as soon as Zelensky got there today, Trump came to greet him outside of the White House dressed in the normal Trump presidential costume of a expensive suit and a silk tie. And Zelensky showed up in his sweatshirt and jeans, and President Trump immediately said, oh, look, he came well dressed. Already kind of mocking and insulting Zelensky. You know, I guess at the beginning when Russia invaded in 2022, it made sense for Zelensky to prance around in camouflage or whatever, because the idea was he had to go underground. He was hiding. He was commanding from a bunker. Now he's on the cover of Vogue. He travels around the world. He's in Kiev. Has no more, but he continues to wear it. And I guess President Trump didn't appreciate the fact that he showed up at the Oval Office for a meeting with President Trump, with Vice President J.D. Vance, dressed, you might dress going to the mall, or if you were hiking up a mountain, and there to be a little bit the way the meeting begins. Now here is them in the Oval Office. They sat down in the traditional place in the Oval Office where world leaders, when they visit the White House, and sitting next to the president, surrounded by officials, the traveling party that Zelensky brought with him. And on President Trump's left was Vice President J.D. Vance, and then next to him was Secretary of State Marco Rubio and his Treasury Secretary right next to him. And obviously, world leaders argue all the time. They fight all the time. They have disagreements all the time, especially in a case like this where there's been a war of words over the past couple of weeks, but even longer going back, there was a fear in Kiev that if Trump won, aid to Ukraine could be endangered, but a true war broke out, a major confrontation that first involved President Trump and President Zelensky. Vice President Vance got involved, and it just continued to escalate because Zelensky, instead of doing what might have been wise given his dependency and his country's dependency on the United States, kept interrupting, talking over them, fighting with them, and therefore fueling this disagreement, making Trump as angry as I've seen him in public. I've never seen Trump raise his voice this way. I don't know if I would say he lost control of his composure, but he certainly lost his cool. He clearly does not like Zelensky. He dislikes Zelensky's posture. And he basically kept telling him, look, you're in no position to do anything but come here with your hat in your hand, and you should be expressing gratitude to us. And instead, you're very ungrateful. You're very demanding. And you're going to risk World War III. You're playing games with the lives of millions of people, including your countries. It was a remarkably contentious, public argument that I think isn't just about personality clashes, but is about some very deep-seated disagreements that clearly the Trump administration and President Trump in particular have with Zelensky. Right now, there's been reporting that Biden used to get very angry with Zelensky as well, to the extent that Biden knew what was going on. He felt like Zelensky was constantly asking for more money. And there have been reports that Biden got very angry on various calls, but none of that happened in public. Here is just a segment of what took place, the remarkably just contentious and confrontational exchange between Vance and Trump on the one hand and President Zelensky on the other.
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you are
Mr.
not
President,
strong...
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come to the office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems? Bringing people into your military?
We have problems.
And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't
God
know that.
bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. Yeah, you're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. It's back to you. Far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once?
A lot of times.
No, in this entire meeting, you said thank you.
Today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Your country's in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No.
Can
You've
I
done a lot
answer?
of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not
I
winning.
know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of
we are
coming out
staying,
okay because of
Mr.
us.
President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
You haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
You
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through
I
this
said
stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military equipment.
You
and you
voted
men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
What about
if you didn't have
You
our
invited
military
me.
equipment,
You invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks. It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this, I tell you.
Just say thank you.
I said a lot of times thank you to American people.
Accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on here. I think it's very important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the
I'm
cards.
thankful.
You're buried there. Your people are dying.
tell you
You're
again,
running
I
low
know.
on soldiers.
Don't-
Listen,
don't,
you're
please,
running
Mr.
low on
President.
soldiers. It would be a damn good thing.
Mr.
And then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go and I wanted this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're
I
saying
said,
you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a
with
ceasefire
guarantees.
because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Now, it is true, people often point out, and I think rightly so, that a lot of what Donald Trump says, a lot of what he does, a lot of what he threatens he will do, a lot of what he predicts will happen is his way of trying to gain an upper hand in negotiations. If anything, if he prides himself on anything, it's priding himself on being a good deal maker. That's been his brand and his identity going all the way back those decades when he was a real estate developer in New York and then a casino developer. The name of his book, as you likely know, is The Art of the Deal. This is how he thinks of himself above all else, as somebody who's not just a deal maker, but drives a very hard deal. So when he's yelling at Zelensky, when he's insulting him, when he's telling him he has no leverage, it very well might be on some level an attempt to force Zelensky into doing a deal that President Trump perceives as favorable to the country. And even if it's disfavorable to Ukraine, by saying, look, you have no leverage. You need us. You have no cards to play. You're going to basically sign whatever we tell you to sign, because if you don't, we'll cut off aid to you and you'll have no chance to fight the Russians. You'll have no leverage. Your country is going to be gone. So it might have been some of that. But clearly, as I said, the way in which Trump's comportment was so different than it normally is. I mean, even when he's very angry at the press, he'll be snide, maybe he'll be insulting. It's always with a kind of light demeanor. He doesn't like to show that someone's gotten to him, that someone's made him angry. Here, clearly, I don't think it was just Zelensky. Today, I think the whole situation of Zelensky demanding more money constantly, of always complaining that it's not enough, is something that clearly Trump is angry about. Angry toward Zelensky, angry toward Ukraine, angry toward the Biden administration, resentful toward Europe. And that is likely to have an effect on how President Trump treats Ukraine going forward. But I think the most important thing continues to be Trump vowed when he ran that he would open relations and communication with the Russians in order to end the war in Ukraine promptly. He continues to say that's his goal. So this idea that some people have, including, as I mentioned, Michael Tracy, that he's really just trying to continue the war indefinitely and wanting to get as much as possible for it, seems inconsistent to me with the rhetorical goal he continues to set for himself, the metric of success that he continues to define, which is that he intends to end this war and end this war quickly. He constantly says he wants to be known not just as a deal maker, but as a peacemaker. And so if this war continues to just go on indefinitely, I think Trump will consider himself to have failed in that goal that he constantly sets for himself. The metric he invites you to use to judge him by will be a failure. So I don't think this was just a negotiating ploy. I don't think Trump is envisioning this war going on for long. He realizes it depends not just on himself, but on Putin. and on the Russians. And part of what I think was so interesting about that interview we did with Professor Dugin was, despite this cartoonish image that the Western media and the Western governments like to depict of Russia being this totalitarian regime, everybody is just subordinate to Putin, Putin speaks and everybody obeys, there's a lot of political pressure on Putin. And it's coming not from the faction that wants to end the war in Ukraine, but the faction that's very concerned that Putin cares too much about integration into the West, that he's too willing to make concessions and give too much away in order to get an agreement with Trump and with NATO in order to end the war. And so he has to be very careful. And so it's not only up to Trump or even up to Putin, but about how much political space there is for Putin to be able to do the kind of concessions or the kind of negotiating that would be necessary to end this war. But that is clearly Trump's goal. He thinks this war is a waste. He thinks it is dangerous. He thinks it is creating a lot of unnecessary, massive loss of life, all of which is true. But he also has to drive a hard bargain, not just with Ukraine, but also with Russia. Otherwise, there won't be a deal done. And I think that continues to be, and I hope it is, what his actual goal is. But you saw the spillover of what had been long-standing tensions, probably on Zelensky's part, because he was the one who was led to believe, he was the one who was encouraged and was told that, oh, don't worry, you don't have to do a peace deal with Russia in the beginning. That's what Victoria Nuland and Boris Johnson told him. We, the West, are going to continue to support you no matter what you do for however long it takes. So just go to war with the Russians. We'll give you everything we need. We'll be behind you. And as often happens with the United States, either the policy changes, the promises weren't enduring, the climate in Washington changes, and Zelensky's finding that from his perspective, he prolonged this war. He avoided a diplomatic solution because he was promised aid, and now he's being told, look, either you sign your mineral rights away or we're going to cut off your aid. And so I'm sure he's resentful as well. He perceives himself as being the tip of the West, of democracy fighting against Russia. He clearly believes all of that. But as Trump told him, look, you're not winning. You have no chance to win. Your only goal should be to end this war. Otherwise, you're not going to have a country left. And it's, I think, rather cathartic, actually, to hear a president say that, but also to hear a president say, as he said yesterday when asked about the conditions for ending the war, he said, NATO is out. Ukraine is never going to be part of NATO. He said that's probably the reason the war began in the first place. And so rather than this caricature that, oh, Putin started the war because he's a psychotic monster, even though we've heard for 25 years from 5 different presidents that he's rational and trustworthy and shrewd and cunning, got turned into like some Hitlerian psychopath overnight who just wants to conquer the world regardless of the cost. Trump said the reality is that it was the U.S. movement toward putting Ukraine in NATO that likely provoked Putin into the war. That was a factor of the war. Also very refreshing to hear such a realistic rather than a propagandistic or fairy tale view coming from the White House about what has been this horrific and, at the end of the day, completely unnecessary war that is now in its 4th full year.
Dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
Feel influenced.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
The fight in the White House between U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukraine's leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, is the perfect symbol of what the United States has done to Ukraine in recent years.
Your country's in big trouble. Wait a minute. No, you've done a lot of talking.
The US treats Ukraine like a colony, and now Trump is demanding hundreds of billions of dollars of payment by extracting minerals and other natural resources from Ukraine. And in that fight in the White House, Trump says it all openly. He tells Ukraine's leader, you don't have the cards. This is not your decision to make. The U.S. is making this decision on Ukraine's behalf.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not
Mr.
in a
Brown,
good position.
I
You don't
was-
have the cards right now. With us, you start having
not
cards.
playing
But
cards.
right now, you don't.
I'm very
You're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
And when a journalist asked Trump what the U.S. is going to do in the future in Ukraine, if the U.S. is going to leave troops, Trump's response was, we're going to have workers taking the minerals and the rare earth elements from Ukraine.
You know, we have security in a different form. We'll have workers there digging, taking the raw earth so that we can create a lot of great product in this country.
The U.S. government pushed Ukraine into this war in the first place, using Ukraine as a proxy to try to hurt Russia, to weaken Russia. And now that the U.S. and NATO lost the war, Trump is simply throwing Ukraine under the bus and in the process trying to make hundreds of billions of dollars in profits. Trump is imposing on Ukraine a minerals deal in which the U.S. will be paid hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue from Ukraine's natural resources. And the British newspaper The Telegraph obtained a copy of this agreement that Trump is imposing, and it referred to this as a form of economic colonialism, saying the United States is turning Ukraine into an economic colony. When Zelensky was in the White House, a journalist asked Trump what Ukraine will get out of this minerals deal. And Trump said, Ukraine's not going to get anything. It's the United States that is going to be paid hundreds of billions of dollars, and the U.S. is going to get access to Ukraine's minerals. He was proud of this. He boasted about this. And in particular, Trump said that the U.S. wants to get access to rare earth elements. Although when you listen to this clip, listen carefully, and you can hear that Trump actually repeatedly says raw earth elements. He apparently doesn't know what rare earths are. He refers to them as raw earths repeatedly. It's clear that he was just given a talking point by one of his assistants. But in these comments, you can hear that the U.S. is exploiting Ukraine's minerals, and the U.S. is going to profit from this deal.
How does this provide long-term security for Ukraine?
Well, we don't know exactly how much because we're going to be putting some money in a fund that we're going to get from the raw earth that we're going to be taking and sharing in terms of revenue. So it's going to be a lot of money will be made from the sale and from the use of raw earth. And as you know, our country doesn't have much raw earth. We have a lot of oil and gas, but we don't have a lot of the raw earth. And what we do have is protected by the environmentalists, but that can be unprotected, but still it's not very much. They have among the best in the world in terms of raw earth. So we're going to be using that, using it for all of the things we do, including AI and including weapons and the military. And it's really going to very much satisfy our needs. So it's something that just worked out really well. We have a lot of oil and we have a lot of gas. We have a lot, but we don't have raw earth. So this has just about every component of the raw earth that we need for computers, for all of the things we do.
Now, some of Trump's allies have been saying this for years. In particular, the Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has repeatedly said that the U.S. wanted to get access to trillions of dollars of minerals in Ukraine.
But what did Trump do to get the weapons flowing? He created a loan system. They're sitting on $10 to $12 trillion of critical minerals in Ukraine. They could be the richest country in all of Europe. I don't want to give that money and those assets to Putin to share with China. If we help Ukraine now, they can become the best business partner we ever dreamed of. That $10 to $12 trillion of critical mineral assets could be used by Ukraine and the West, not given to Putin and China. This is a very big deal how Ukraine ends.
In fact, in an interview on Fox News in November 2024, just 2 weeks after Trump won the presidential election, Lindsey Graham said clearly that the war in Ukraine is all about money. He said that the U.S. wants to get access to trillions of dollars of minerals and rare earth elements in Ukraine. And he said that Trump is going to impose a deal on Ukraine in which the U.S. will enrich itself.
But we're 1,000 days into this war. Ukraine is still standing. This war is about money. People don't talk much about it. But you know the richest country in all of Europe for rare earth minerals is Ukraine. $2 to $7 trillion worth of minerals that are rare earth minerals, very relevant to the 21st century. Ukraine's ready to do a deal with us, not the Russians. So it's in our interest to make sure that Russia doesn't take over the place. It's the breadbasket of really the developing world. 50% of all the food going to Africa comes out of Ukraine. We can make money and have an economic relationship with Ukraine that'd be very beneficial to us with peace. So Donald Trump's going to do a deal to get our money back, to enrich ourselves with rare earth minerals.
This is colonialism. What the United States is doing to Ukraine, its so-called ally, is 21st century colonialism. This is how the U.S. empire treats its so-called allies. The U.S. empire is turning Ukraine into a resource colony to extract its minerals and rare earth elements, which are very important for U.S. technology companies. You know, Trump wants to reindustrialize the U.S., and the U.S. needs to get access to minerals and rare earths. And they think that Ukraine has trillions of dollars worth of these elements. And also, it should be pointed out that extracting rare earths and processing them is extremely toxic. It's very bad for the environment. Researchers have warned about this. In a scientific article published in 2024, they wrote, quote, "The long-term large-scale mining and utilization of rare earths has caused serious environmental pollution and constitutes a global health issue, which has raised concerns regarding the safety of human health," end quote. So the U.S. wants to take these rare earths from Ukraine, and in the process, the U.S. is going to pollute Ukraine. But of course, the U.S. treats Ukraine as a colony, so they don't care. They don't want to pollute people domestically in the U.S., although, you know, Trump criticized environmentalists. But this is how the U.S. empire treats Ukraine, as a colony, so they can poison the Ukrainian people, because the way that the U.S. empire sees it, Ukraine has been destroyed as a country thanks to the U.S. using Ukraine as a puppet, pushing Ukraine into this war, this proxy war against Russia. Ukraine lost, the U.S. lost, NATO lost. So now the U.S. wants to suck Ukraine dry and poison the country in the process. And there is, of course, a geopolitical element of this. It's not just U.S. corporate greed. It's also the fact that the United States is trying to weaken China. The U.S. is waging a new Cold War on China, and China plays a central role in global supply chains, especially for rare earth elements and critical minerals. And the U.S. Congress has a committee on the Communist Party of China that is dedicated to plotting the new Cold War and planning ways to try to weaken Beijing. And the U.S. Congress published a lengthy report that is called the Critical Minerals Policy Working Group Final Report, and it's subtitled Creating Resilient Critical Mineral Supply Chains. And this document is part of a larger campaign by the U.S. military that refers to China's role in the critical mineral supply chain as a national security threat. Those are the words of the U.S. Department of Defense. So the U.S. thinks that Ukraine could be a potential new source for rare earths in order for the U.S. to reduce its dependency on China and try to weaken China by removing it from the supply chain. Everything that the Trump administration is doing is aimed at trying to weaken China. And of course, this is bipartisan. The Biden administration was doing this as well. However, unlike Biden, Trump has proposed that the U.S. should try to ally with Russia against China. Trump admitted openly in an interview in October 2024 that he wants to divide Russia and China as part of his strategy to weaken Beijing.
The one thing you never want to happen is you never want Russia and China uniting. We united them. It's a shame, the stupidity of what they've done. Well, I'm going to have to unite them, and I think I can do that too. I have to unite them.
In fact, if you watch the full meeting that Trump held with Zelensky in the White House on the 28th of February, as I did, if you go through all of it, you can see that Trump hinted at this. He said the U.S. wants to invest in Ukraine to get access to its rare earths, or as he said, raw earths and other minerals. And he said that the U.S. wants to use that to create technology, including weapons. And then Trump said that the U.S. is going to use those weapons in many locations, as he said. Listen here.
We'll have workers there digging, taking the raw earth so that we can create a lot of great product in this country. This is an incredible agreement for Ukraine because we have a big investment in their country now. And what they have, very few people have. And we're able to really go forward with very, very high-tech things and many other things, including weaponry that we're going to use in many locations, but that we need for our country.
That clip is very revealing. Trump was saying the quiet part loud. The U.S. is turning Ukraine into a colony, extracting its resources to create weapons and technology to prepare for war on China, the new Cold War against China. And Trump doesn't see Russia as a threat. That's why he wants to ally with Russia against China. Now, as I explained in the other video that I did about this, which I will link to in the description below, I don't think that Trump will be successful in dividing Russia and China. I could be wrong, but I think he's going to fail. But the point is that Trump doesn't care about peace. This is not about peace. This is about turning Ukraine into a colony to prepare for a future war against what the U.S. sees as the real so-called threat, which is China. Now, according to The Telegraph, the British newspaper, which is actually linked to the Conservative Party, so they're somewhat sympathetic to Trump, but they also deeply support Ukraine and they're very anti-Russia. And this newspaper obtained the original draft of the deal that Trump has been trying to impose on Ukraine. And according to the language of this deal, it would give the United States control over the, quote, mineral resources, oil and gas resources, ports, other infrastructure, end quote, in Ukraine. And the deal would be based on New York law. Again, this is colonialism. So Ukraine has to follow U.S. domestic law. And according to the original plan, the United States would be paid 50% of all revenues received by Ukraine from the extraction of its resources. And the U.S. would be given 50% of the financial value of all new licenses issued to third parties in the future permanently. Someone close to the negotiations referred to this U.S. colonial plan as, quote, pay us first, then feed your children, end quote. Also, this deal demanded by Trump, the original deal, would have given the U.S. the right of refusal for the purchase of exportable minerals for all future license. As this newspaper put it, Washington will have sovereign immunity and acquire near total control over most of Ukraine's commodity and resource economy. Now, that was the text of the original deal that Trump was trying to impose on Ukraine. However, there were negotiations later, and allegedly, according to reports from the Ukrainian government, they did come to a slightly different agreement. And this was discussed in the Financial Times in an article published by Scott Bessent, who is Trump's Treasury Secretary. Scott Bessent is also a billionaire hedge fund manager. Ironically, the bugbears, main boogeyman of the Republican Party. But now Donald Trump picked a Soros protege, this billionaire hedge fund manager, to oversee the Treasury. And in this article, Bessent revealed that the terms that the U.S. and Ukraine agreed to is that they will create a joint fund. And I'm going to read directly from his article, quote, the terms of our partnership propose that revenue received by the government of Ukraine from natural resources, infrastructure, and other assets is allocated to a fund focused on the long-term reconstruction and development of Ukraine, where the U.S. will have economic and governance rights in those future investments, end quote. So the U.S. is going to control what Ukraine does with its own money, with the money that it's earned through the sale of minerals and oil and gas. And of course, the US wants to take those minerals and especially rare earths from Ukraine if they have them. I mean, there's still debate about whether or not Ukraine has so many rare earths, but the US thinks that they do have all of these rare earths. So Ukraine will sell that. And then with the money that Ukraine gets, it puts it in this fund, and the US government will control what Ukraine can do with its own money. This is economic colonialism. And where is Ukraine going to invest that money? Well, the billionaire Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, he hinted very strongly that Ukraine is going to use its money to invest with US corporations. As Scott Bessent noted, because he went to Ukraine and he met with Zelensky, and he wrote, quote, "I met many American companies that have been on the ground in Ukraine for years, and I have spoken with many more who are ready to support the Ukrainian economy through a just and lasting peace. The terms of this partnership will mobilize American talent, capital, and high standards," end quote. So he's pretty clearly hinting there that Ukraine's money from selling its resources will be reinvested with US companies operating in Ukraine. So Ukraine will be funding the US corporate takeover of the country. Again, this is economic colonialism. That's the only word to describe it. Now, after the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent published that article in the FT, the Financial Times published another report that provides a little more information about this Ukraine deal. The FT pointed out that according to the language of the deal, this Ukraine fund will be set up, quote, with the encumbrance legal claim of such revenues in favor of the United States, end quote. So not only is the US going to decide what the fund will do with this money that comes from Ukraine, but the US will have a legal claim over the revenues that Ukraine gets from exporting its minerals. And as the Financial Times pointed out, they published Scott Bessent's article, but they pointed out that he conveniently did not mention how much of the proceeds from mineral extraction will be allocated to the fund or how much will be paid to the United States. He conveniently left out this very important detail about how much money the US is going to be paid from Ukraine. And by the way, one of the most incredible details of this article is that Bessent reveals that Zelensky visited Trump in Trump Tower in September 2024, and the Ukrainian leader proposed giving the US a stake in Ukraine's rare earth elements and critical minerals. And this was part of his attempt to convince Trump to continue giving Ukraine weapons to fight against Russia. So this is the ultimate irony of all of this, is that Zelensky was always a Western puppet, in particular a US puppet. The US used Ukraine to fight this proxy war against Russia. They lost the war. Now Trump is throwing Ukraine under the bus, sacrificing Ukraine. And this proposal that Zelensky had made, it has gone on steroids. Trump is demanding even more than Zelensky had originally proposed. So this is why, again, this is a lesson to other countries around the world. By the way, I should point out that this is similar to what the US did to Iraq after the US invaded Iraq in an illegal war of aggression in 2003. The US overthrew the Iraqi government and created a puppet regime. And then what happened? The Bush administration passed an executive order that stated that all of the oil revenue received from Iraq must go into an account administered by the US Federal Reserve, the US Central Bank. Not colonialism because Iraq still has access to that money, but the US government oversees that money. So they're not technically taking the money from Iraq, but Iraq has to get permission from the United States to use its own money that it receives from selling its oil. This is another form of economic colonialism. This is how the United States treats other countries. The US is not a normal country. It is an empire that tries to impose its hegemony and colonial policies on other countries to benefit US corporations, US billionaires like Trump. There are 13 billionaires in the Trump administration. Trump himself is, of course, a billionaire. And the de facto co-president is Elon Musk, the richest billionaire oligarch on earth. And what the Bush administration did to Iraq was just the beginning of what now the US is doing to Ukraine, which again, Ukraine is its supposed ally. This is how the US treats its allies. This is why the infamous US imperial strategist Henry Kissinger famously said, quote, "It may be dangerous to be America's enemy, but to be America's friend is fatal," end quote. And Ukraine, unfortunately, is learning the hard way that it is definitely fatal. The US is destroying Ukraine's economy after the US pushed Ukraine into this war against Russia and destroyed an entire generation of Ukrainians. It's really completely tragic to see what the US is doing to the Ukrainian people. It is so sad. And Trump was asked about this in the White House in a press conference on the 25th of February, 3 days before Zelensky arrived in Washington. And a journalist asked Trump, "What is Ukraine going to get out of this deal? They don't get anything." And Trump said, "Well, we gave weapons to Ukraine, hundreds of billions of dollars of weapons in support to Ukraine. What he didn't mention is that most of that money went to the U.S. military-industrial complex, went to U.S. corporations that then sent the weapons and ammunition to Ukraine." Trump claims that supposedly $350 billion by the U.S. were sent to Ukraine. In a second, I'll talk about how that's false. It's not true at all. He completely made up that number. But then he says that the U.S. expects to be paid back $350 billion by Ukraine. By the way, the official GDP of Ukraine, if we can believe the official statistics, which are very questionable because of the war, but the official GDP is around $180 billion. Trump is demanding that Ukraine pay the U.S. twice the size of the entire economy of Ukraine because the U.S. used Ukraine as a puppet, as a proxy to fight a war against Russia, and the U.S. lost, and now they're going to suck Ukraine dry. Here's this clip.
What does Ukraine get in return, Mr. President?
$350 billion and lots of equipment, and military equipment, and the right to fight on, and originally the right to fight. Look, Ukraine, I will say they're very brave and they're good soldiers, but without the United States and its money and its military equipment, this war would have been over in a very short period of time. In fact, I was the one that gave the javelins. You remember the famous javelins? That was me. That wasn't Obama. It wasn't Biden. It wasn't anybody else. It was me. And they wiped out a lot of tanks with those javelins. And the expression was that Obama gave sheets and I gave the javelins. That was a big deal at the time. It wiped out. That was the beginning when people said, wow, that's something. Well, that was American equipment. Without American equipment, this war would have been over very quickly. And American money, too. I mean, a lot of money.
By the way, note how at the end of that clip there, Trump boasted that he gave Javelin missiles, that's anti-tank missile systems, to Ukraine. And he said that Obama only gave Ukraine sheets, where he gave Ukraine missiles. So Trump is boasting of the fact that he helped to start this war in the first place. And now Trump is trying to blame everything on the Democrats, on Obama and Biden, saying he had nothing to do with it. But at the same time, Trump is so stupid that he says, I had nothing to do with this, but then he boasts, yeah, I gave Ukraine all of these weapons to fight a proxy war against Russia. And now he's expecting Ukraine to pay $350 billion. He's repeated this figure multiple times. Here's another clip in which he makes it clear that he wants to suck out of Ukraine twice the size of the entire GDP of the country.
Spent money like nobody's ever seen, $350 billion. The other thing that we don't like is that Europe has spent $100 billion. We've spent $350 billion. So what we're doing is now we're saying, look, we want to be secured. We want to get that money back.
This number that Trump keeps citing of $350 billion is completely made up. He fabricated it. Even according to the U.S. Department of Defense, the Pentagon, they reported that in the 3 years from the beginning of 2022 to the end of 2024, the U.S. military appropriated $182.8 billion in just appropriations. Now, that includes not just money that went to Ukraine, it also includes all of the military operations related to this proxy war against Russia, including the training of military personnel in Europe, including all of the weapons and ammunition. And again, I need to stress, a lot of that money went to the U.S. military-industrial complex. It wasn't aid, in scare quotes, the U.S. was giving to the Ukrainian people. It was contracts that the U.S. government gave to Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and the Beltway bandits, and they made the weapons and rockets and bullets and everything, and then they sent that to Ukraine. Wasn't benefiting from it. U.S. military complex, whose profits skyrocketed, and Ukraine sacrificed an entire generation of people. So Ukrainians were dying on the front lines. The U.S. was fighting to the last Ukrainian, but the U.S. military-industrial complex, Trump wants Ukraine to pay back twice what even the Pentagon says was appropriated. By the way, I should point out that other analyses, independent analyses done by, for instance, this German think tank, the Kiel Institute, they estimated that the U.S. spent around $120 billion. Again, a lot of that went to the U.S. military-industrial complex, but this is, even if you're being very charitable and you're using the Department of Defense's official figures, Trump is demanding twice as much as the Pentagon was appropriated in payment from Ukraine, sucking Ukraine dry. And when you consider all of this context, you can understand why the Ukrainian leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, was so angry in this press conference he held with Trump at the White House. And this is why it's so condescending and so arrogant to hear these leaders of the U.S. empire that has waged war around the world, has killed millions of people, has devastated entire regions of the world. And yet J.D. Vance, the U.S. vice president, who his career was cultivated by the billionaire oligarch Peter Thiel. He created J.D. Vance in a political petri dish. And then here is Vance in the White House, and he's lecturing Zelensky about why Zelensky needs to thank the U.S. after the U.S. destroyed Ukraine. He claims in an Orwellian fashion that the U.S. is trying to save Ukraine, but in reality, it's the U.S. that destroyed Ukraine in the first place.
But Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict. And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
And then in this meeting, Trump repeatedly told Zelensky, you are not in a position to dictate terms to the end of this war. We control Ukraine. We are deciding how this war is going to end. You are our colony. Trump repeatedly said, you don't have any cards. We have the cards. Trump treated this like a card game.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember this. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. You're playing cards.
And then one of the most insulting parts of this is that Trump said, our stupid previous president, Joe Biden, gave you $350 billion. I've already established how that number is fake. But Trump said, Biden spent all this money on Ukraine, and I'm demanding that you pay back all of that money, even though that money, a lot of it went to the U.S. military-industrial complex. And then Zelensky, I mean, this guy's a total U.S. puppet, and he's now realizing that he destroyed his country on behalf of the U.S. empire, and he's being blamed for it. And this is why Zelensky's like, wait, you can't blame me. It was your government. Yes, it was a Democrat, but it was still the U.S. government. Trump can't come in and say suddenly that now the U.S. is a new country. Everything that happened before I entered the White House never happened because now I'm the president and Biden was a previous president. That's not how politics works. Trump is the leader of the United States. The previous presidents, including he himself, are responsible for this war.
We gave you, through this stupid president, $350 billion. We gave you military equipment, and you men are brave, but they use our military. If you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In fact, Trump repeatedly boasted that he gave the Javelin missile systems to Ukraine. And he boasted that Obama only gave blankets and sheets, but Trump gave missiles. And now Trump says, oh, I had nothing to do with this. Blame my predecessors. This is why Zelensky says, but it was your government. The people of the U.S. voted for Biden and Obama, and then they also voted for you, you're all responsible. Trump wants to erase all of that history and simply is telling Ukraine, pay up.
For you, what
That wasn't
this
with me.
means? It
That was
wasn't
with
you.
a guy named Biden, who was not a smart person.
This
That
is
was
your,
with,
this
that was
is
with
your
Obama.
president. It was your president.
Excuse me. That was with Obama, who gave you sheets, and I gave you javelins.
Yes.
I gave you the javelins to take out all those tanks. Obama gave you sheets. In fact, the statement is Obama gave sheets and Trump gave javelins. You got to be more thankful, because let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards.
That fight in the White House is, for me, the perfect symbol of this colonial relationship that the U.S. has with Ukraine. The U.S. fought until the last Ukrainian. You know, Trump and Vance were yelling at Zelensky and telling him to be grateful because they no longer have any soldiers to fight in Ukraine.
You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards. You're buried there. Your people are dying. You're running low on soldiers. Listen, you're running low on soldiers.
But that's because the U.S. and NATO fought to the last Ukrainian. They're the ones who sacrificed Ukrainians, and now they're telling Ukraine to be grateful for us sacrificing you. And then the worst of all of this, the cherry on top of the imperial hypocrisy, is that the U.S. is demanding to be paid back after the U.S. fought to the last Ukrainian. It is so vile. It is so cynical. And then after all of that, as if it weren't insulting and stomach churning enough, the obsequious Trump toady, Lindsey Graham, this Republican senator who obediently tells Trump, yes, sir, whatever you want. Yes, sir, I will do it. Please tell me what to do. He goes out in a press conference, and then Lindsey Graham says that Ukraine and Zelensky can no longer be trusted to be partners in business investments of the U.S., acting as though Ukraine is benefiting from this. Ukraine's not benefiting. It's the U.S. that is benefiting from extracting the minerals from Ukraine and turning Ukraine into a colony.
At the end of the day, I was hoping that this minerals deal, which would be transformative in the relationship, would go over well. What I saw in the Oval Office was disrespectful, and I don't know if we can ever do business with Zelensky again. And I think he has made it almost impossible to sell to the American people that he's a good investment.
Listen to what he said there. Lindsey Graham is acting like Ukraine benefits from this. He says we're investing in Ukraine, but the U.S. gets revenue from Ukraine's sale of its minerals and oil and gas. The U.S. controls all of the investments that Ukraine makes. Ukraine's not benefiting from this. It's U.S. corporations and the U.S. government that are benefiting from this. This is colonialism. And then finally, a journalist asked Lindsey Graham if he thinks that Zelensky should stay in power. And this U.S. senator says that Zelensky should consider resigning because the U.S. wants an even more obedient puppet. They want to throw out their old puppet because their old puppet is no longer obeying orders, so they need a new one.
He either needs to resign and send somebody over that we can do business with, or he needs to change.
For me, this whole affair is the perfect symbol of the true face of the U.S. government. You can never trust the U.S. government. Trump is making that very clear. But this is not new. This is not just Trump. The U.S. empire has been carrying out these kinds of policies for decades. The difference is that Trump doesn't hide it. He says it openly. He says the quiet part loud. Look, for instance, at the U.S. relationship with the U.K. At the end of World War II, famously, in 1945, the U.S. gave a $4.3 billion loan at that time. Adjusted for inflation today, that would be a loan of $77 billion. This was twice the size of the entire British economy at the time. And it took the UK 6 decades to pay off this loan. It was finally paid off in 2006. And the New York Times pointed out that at the time, this loan strained relations between the US and the UK because British politicians expected that the US would simply give this as aid to the UK because this was the end of World War II. Their country was destroyed in World War II. But again, this is how the US empire treats its so-called allies. Trump has simply taken off the mask. He no longer uses rhetoric of democracy and human rights like Democrats do. He's saying very clearly, we are an empire and we're going to colonize Greenland to get access to rare earths and other minerals in Greenland because he wants those as well. He wants to weaken China, wage the new Cold War in China, prevent China from getting access to the Arctic region. He's saying that the U.S. is going to colonize the Panama Canal. It's going to try to even Canada, attacking Mexico, colonize Gaza. And here he's also colonizing Ukraine economically. And again, I'm going to conclude with this famous quote from the U.S. imperial strategist Henry Kissinger. We know that Kissinger did say this in the context of Vietnam and the puppet regime that the U.S. was propping up in South Vietnam. And Kissinger famously said, quote, "It may be dangerous to be America's enemy, but to be America's friend is fatal," end quote. And Ukraine has learned that the hard way, with Trump yelling in the face of Zelensky and telling him to be grateful for being colonized by the U.S. empire. On that note, I'm going to conclude. I am Ben Norton. I'm the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report.
Coffee. Follow me.